And we're live. Welcome, everybody. This is the Cascadia Network's Center for the Humanities at Victory Farm, special vision pitch and planning session for a conference responding to Jordan Peterson and the Counter Enlightenment. They're being joined today by myself, Brian, and Douglas Lain from Zero Books. I'm just going to say a couple quick words about how this got started and then turn it over to Doug so he can talk about it a little bit as well. So I guess I can speak for all three of us present that Jordan Peterson came onto our radar a lot sooner than it did for a lot of other people. I spent last summer listening to all of his lectures. And when I say all, I mean like, a lot. But I was working. I was, painting fences and tearing up people's yards and stuff like that, just doing landscaping work. And so it was fitting because he is speaking to for more or less like the working class. And what I found most interesting in his in everything he was doing was his pedagogical approach, because I teach classes for freshmen. He teaches classes for freshmen. He seemed, he's rated one of the two most liked professors at University of Ontario, and so I was really interested in how he's able to sell students on the humanities and psychology, even though they're considered soft, in the university these days, and how he's able to sell that to people who, generally speaking, if they are in the academic scene at all, tend to be going into or coming out of computer sciences or engineering. At least that was my experience, because that's how I found out about him, was because I had multiple instances of students who were often like my most interested students in class coming to me being like, have you read or heard about this Jordan Peterson guy? And so that's how I had originally started checking it out. And so Douglas Lain has been one of the, I think, best respondents, commentators, and critics of Peterson, coming from the left, at least the intellectually rigorous and theoretically founded left. And so, I don't know, I'll finish by saying my biggest pet peeve has been the constant onslaught of cheap criticism coming from the leftish, and especially like that article I shared in the event page today from Jacobin, which was pretty much terrible. So hi, Kelsey, welcome.
Hello.
I just did a whole introduction about what got me in on this, and then the transition is to introduce Douglas Lain before we turn it around to Brian and yourself. And so just to say that this was originally we were originally just going to have a conversation. It was going to be a debate post game, because Douglas was supposed to have a debate with Jordan Peterson, and Peterson canceled on him and then lied on the Joe Rogan podcast, which is where he reached the most people, saying that real Marxists won't debate him. So we wanted to. Because that post game apparently won't ever happen, we thought, well, let's have a formal, real forum on this, so that there can be like a once and for all response. That's not just a bunch of cheap shots and call outs. So anyway, hi. I'll just turn it over to you, Douglas.
Okay. Well, I was very disappointed that the debate with Peterson didn't happen. Primarily because I was using that debate or scheduled interview as a timeline or a deadline for me to clean my room. I was going to go through the whole house, clean everything, make it spotless. You can look around and see that's needed. Okay, but seriously, about Peterson. He came on my radar about a year ago as well. The way I found out about him was someone who was on the left shared a link to a video with him. I think it was one of the earliest ones that really went viral, although it may not have been the first one to go viral. And it was a confrontation between Peterson and some trans or gender fluid students in Toronto. And they shared it with me, this person on the left, because they felt sympathetic with Peterson and tired of being harassed by students. And I watched it and I thought, yeah, I thought a number of things. I thought, yeah, he's coming across like the button down, white Anglo-Saxon authority figure, academic, intellectual. And that, of course, that's what he is. And but also I thought I should be a little suspicious of how pat this whole situation is. And so I looked him up and I decided that while he was interesting, especially his Jungian approach to culture was interesting, and he was more philosophically rigorous than, say, Ben Shapiro or David Rubin or someone like that, that he was nonetheless, I thought right away, a reactionary figure. He was a conservative and a traditionalist with what seemed like hints of true reactionary politics. And by that, I don't mean bad politics, although I think reactionary politics are bad. But I mean that he works in a nostalgic mode and advocates for a return to a culture that maybe never existed. And that he's not only wanting to hold on to what is or the best in society as it is, but turn back the clock on a number of things. Just precisely what things, is kind of difficult to pin him down on. But so yeah, I thought he was, on the one hand, worth watching because I thought he was probably going to get more and more attention and get more and more famous. But on the other hand, I thought he was worth watching because I thought he was a worthy adversary for anyone who was wanting to be rigorously Marxist, anyone who's wanting to be rigorously progressive, that you'd have to overcome some of the objections that someone like Peterson made in order to have a fully worked out radical politics. And
you mean just yelling and saying it's not important isn't enough?
Right. Well, I mean, look, I don't know. Some of these articles that have come out in Jacobin and Current Affairs and the Baffler and other places have some serious criticism of Peterson in them that should be taken up. The problem is there's such a strong desire to differentiate yourself from Peterson, or there's such a strong desire to make sure that you're seen to be disdainful of not just Peterson but of his audience, that it sort of undermines the rhetorical effectiveness of the works that are coming out and to criticize him. So also they're kind of late. Suddenly he's worthy of attention now that he's dominating Amazon, but he wasn't worthy of attention when he was just 10 times bigger than any left-wing journal. I mean, we're outgunned in the alternative media just as much as we're outgunned in the mainstream media, but we don't quite understand that. I'm not sure why. So yeah, that's my perspective on Peterson, is that he is a worthy adversary in terms of raising issues that the progressives and radicals need to overcome. But what I'm disappointed about with him is that he is not what he claims to be. That the fact that he ducked out on an interview with me is not a big deal. The fact that he's still going on and announcing that no Marxists will debate him, and using the conspiracy theory against cultural Marxists, or the idea that there are a bunch of cultural Marxists running down our universities and Western culture, that's disappointing to me. And I almost believe that if we just got out of Peterson's way, he would be neutralized by the right, that what's interesting about him will pass fairly quickly as he gets absorbed into a system that works to set up liberals against Republicans in this sort of, at least in the United States, in this sort of predictable way. So, but the left should do better than just to watch that happen. We should intervene, and we should try to overcome the best version of Peterson that we can muster in our imaginations.
And I like what you had pointed out in the past as well, that this is actually that he's giving you, people coming from your theoretical background, technically is giving you a spotlight or a pedestal. It's giving you a voice. Marxists haven't had a voice.
Knock down my laptop. Excuse me. Sorry. Go ahead.
Marxists haven't had a real platform in the U.S. for a long time, and so we've had like this sort of neoliberal, identitarian progressivism, but we haven't had any serious structural analyses for a while. And the fact that he is kind of like on this, the Marxists are here to undermine our values. Everyone's like, wait, what? Marxists? What? So he's got like this broad like audience, and all of a sudden they're all like, wait, are there like secret Marxists everywhere? But he's coming from academia where you meet a few, and now he's popularizing that, and it gives us a chance to like be able to respond, I think. And I just on the rhetorical basis as well, it's like you said that the left does, it's marginal in alternative news, media, etc. It's also, marginal in academia and in the mainstream. Well, it doesn't help that like basically every article I've seen that, is kind of vehemently criticizing Peterson usually goes for like the cheapest blow, which is just to say, oh, look, he's a self-help guru. And it's like that, and they say that's his claim to fame because that's when he got big on Amazon, was with his 12 Rules for Life book. But he was big before that, and he was big for other reasons than that. But he's had people, as he's gotten bigger, he's had just this onslaught of questions of people asking, how do I get my life together? Mm-hmm. And the responsible thing to do if you're in his position is to write a book, especially if you have the expertise, which he literally does. So that's some cheap criticism. And the left could actually learn how to speak to normal people, which is something that he's actually able to do, even if he loses a lot of integrity while doing it. Hmm. So I don't know, Brian, Kelsey, David, any of you want to like share your interest in this so far, or questions, comments about anything we've said?
I'm just here to listen. I am bogged down with homework right now for the last 5 years. So I don't know anything that's going on anywhere in the world except for through Facebook and shit. So, but I'm really interested, obviously I'm here. So. Yeah.
Cool. And Douglas, Kelsey is the president of the Boise State Civility Research Network. Yeah, so one of the co-sponsors for the conference. Great.
We got someone else joining us here.
Yeah.
So what about you,
muted. So what I'll say is that. Yeah, the critique that he's a self-help guru is pretty empty on the surface of it. It's not wrong to critique that approach to social change, right? If you're not going to see major structural changes in society or overcome problems which are structural problems simply by improving everyone's individual lives. It's sort of counterintuitive in a way in a society that's as individualistic as ours, and also just theoretically maybe a little difficult, because if you think that everyone is basically free and that individuals are what shape the world, and I believe that's true, then people improving their circumstances would add up to a better world, you would think. But the problem is that the practices that we involve ourselves in, and that we're kind of coerced in a sense of getting involved in, limit our potential. And while there's room for this and that individual to improve their circumstances dramatically. In aggregate, there are countervailing forces which sort of work against a generalized emancipation, and so you have to work on changing the structures of society alongside changing and improving your own conditions. And that's one of the things that Peterson is most adverse to. That's one of the things that he is most critical of, is that idea that we need to work on structural, institutional, cultural, political changes. He doesn't believe that, he sets it against that kind of work, except when it's done by experts who have, dedicated their lives to, say, politics or what have you, who've earned the right through self-mastery and all of that. So, I think that if you're going to write against him being a self-help guru, you need to go probably, like if at this conference that we may do, like that we're going to do, what I may do is address this problem, because I think it's a deep one, actually. The problem of how to overcome individualism without losing sight of the power of the individual is a tricky one for the left. And, again, Peterson, even in his sometimes shallowness, presents challenges for left-wing thinkers that run deep and that need to be worked on and overcome in their own thinking.
Well, and I mean, one of the big, well, I'm sure there's a lot, and you've been thinking about those, and I'd be interested in hearing more about some of them. But one of them that comes to mind is the anti-SJW industry itself, right? Yeah. And how various people have risen to fame by figuring out how to play that. And I'm wondering if, because I think that's your coinage, or at least I heard it first from you. So I'm wondering if you would talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, well, something I've noticed that for the longest time, just to mention the social justice warrior phenomenon was verboten on the left. And then Mark Fisher wrote an essay in 2013, I think, called Exiting the Vampire Castle, in which he sort of named, I don't know if he used the phrase or the term social justice warrior, but he sort of pointed to a problem on the left around identity politics and purism or purity politics. And so what I didn't know at the time about what was developing at the same time was a right wing that was just opportunistically making hay out of some of the excesses that really were going on in the left in online spaces. And it, just as it was possible to monetize a certain sort of woke politics, at the time it wasn't even called that, but articles about white privilege or articles about patriarchy that were simplified and kind of listicles and things like that.
Upworthy.
Yeah, Upworthy, cracked. It became simultaneously possible to monetize reactions against that. And that's what's happened. And I would say at the moment, on YouTube anyway, and possibly in other spaces, it's just as lucrative to be fighting against social justice as it is to be fighting for it now. And so I'd have to do a real study to determine exactly how it works out, but it seems to me that there's a symbiotic relationship just in content production between one side and another. So one side will produce a video, then the other side gets to react to that video, then the other side gets to react to those reactions, all the while click, 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 advertising revenue, Patreon money. Right.
And on YouTube, like I followed for a little bit, I'd been kind of part of the whole new atheist thing for a minute back in the day, and there was the whole critics community on YouTube, and it was always kind of at odds with the kind of cheap versions of feminism that are popular on YouTube. And I say cheap just because, like, both sides are just playing real cheap, right? One says that facts don't care about your feelings, and this is all about evidence and reason. The other side says that stuff doesn't. That stuff's all reducible to power, basically. And ultimately, it just becomes like slogans and gotcha moments, checkmate atheist, kind of like bumper sticker logic.
Right.
But that was the thing about Peterson, is that he came in playing to that, to those audiences, but he had more substance than a Shapiro or a Milo or something like that.
Right. Yeah, and he also just wasn't of that realm so much. He seemed more, and seemed still, I think, a bit more genuine. Although I don't know, maybe I'm just tiring of him, but his facade of being a little bit above the normal level of fray is fading, and he seems to be taking up the bait. But anyway, that's neither here nor there, because the main point about Peterson is not so much him, but what's going on, in our politics overall, and how should we understand the sort of reactive politics that define online spaces, and also define more and more, I think, just the general climate as well. So I'm really looking forward to being able to talk about Peterson and the reactionary right, and how it's a challenge for the far left in October. And I'm really interested in having some people speak who represent a point of view that isn't quite identical to, even in substance, to like the ideas that would be coming from Jacobin or Current Affairs or The Baffler. All of those publications I like a lot, but Peter Rollins, who said would show up, is a really good foil, I think, to traditional thinkers, because he doesn't abandon the need for meaning the way some secular thinkers do. In fact, he once debated Lawrence Krauss, a new atheist type, in a way that was not that dissimilar to the way that Peterson debated Sam Harris. Although I think Peter Rollins did a lot better against Lawrence Krauss than Peterson did against Sam Harris.
Peterson was just not feeling good that day, or not even on the follow-up. Or maybe he's just actually bad at debating very level-headed people who are actually, pretty good at debate. Because Sam Harris is pretty level-headed and good at debate, and so wreck for that.
Well, I just think that they had such different views of what truth is, and that Sam Harris's view of what truth is so fundamentally understandable and sort of non-controversial. It's just aligned with what we all take on an everyday level to be the truth. The correspondence theory of truth. Peterson found himself out of his depth. Maybe not just. I don't know if he could have gone deeper than he did, but the problem was to stay at the level of rhetoric on the issue meant that he was going to lose. That because rhetorically the correspondence theory of truth is just the most persuasive. But
especially for their shared fan base,
right?
More than normal, but yeah.
It'd be interesting for us to, we should share maybe with this group the link to Krauss's interview or debate with Peter Rollins from a couple of years back, to make a kind of comparison between Peterson and Harrison and Rollins and Krauss, because from very different political positions and very, 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 very different psychological traditions as well, they are debating on the side of a complicated meaning, one that is not simply empirical, and that's worth examining, I think.
So Dr. Gabbard and Sammy both joined kind of while you were mid-sentence a little bit earlier. And so I think we've got about 25 minutes, 30 minutes left. And so what would be really cool is to, at this point, check to see if anyone's got any questions or ideas. But right before turning over to that, I just want to say that after that, we'll kind of unpack, like, so far what has, through the conversations between Douglas and I, developed as like panels that we want to have, the potential breakdown of the 2 days for the event, the specific topics that might be covered by individual talks as well. And I just wanted to also be right before we switch gears there, Douglas had just mentioned Peter Rollins. Peter Rollins and Michael Brooks are both from the Majority Report, both saying that they that they want to do this. And Wes Alwyn from the Partially Examined Life was going to join us. He's very interested, and so that's with Doug, and that's 4 podcasters. And we have, the equipment here to record all of this. This could be stuff that y'all use on your podcast. So this it's just this is, the university's here. You're close to here. This is all just very convenient for us and all that. But we have an international audience because of the people who are already interested, and also the fact that that we could also potentially be publishing some of the essays and articles coming out of this. So I think we should be taking very seriously questions of, like, who's our audience, what is our purpose, for the whole thing.
One name that hasn't been mentioned yet is Zizek. And the original idea was to be talking about the supposed debate between Zizek and Peterson. So I just remind us all that that's part of the mix here, is to bring, we should invite him.
At least they will get an invite. Actually, so right now, Dr. Gabbard's going to weigh in because we've potentially, do we have any news on that front?
Well, Peterson hasn't gotten back to me since I sent you the message that he, sent in reply. I don't know if he's, out about, what his schedule is. But one of the things that, we've invited him to come down to Athens, Georgia for the Zizek Studies Conference. And, he did express some interest. We'll see where that goes. I don't know. I know that Slavoy's schedule in October, November's, pretty full. If I get a chance to talk to him in Athens, though, if Peterson doesn't show up, I can certainly ask him to see if he'd be willing to do it, how much it would cost or whatever. Typically, if he knows it's, that the Institute's involved, he might just ask for, basic travel and accommodations to get paid for without asking for some sort of honorarium or a stipend or things like this. The thing that I thought that was very important, the most important thing I think that came out of that kind of pseudo exchange between Zizek and Peterson, there's a question of the need for the left to redefine itself. Because the left, the way it's being defined by Peterson, especially the way that Peterson throws around the word Marxist, and other people are throwing around the word Marxist, the sort of SJW identity politics folks, in my book at least, don't qualify as left. There doesn't appear to be any apparent universal project that they're wedded to, other than looking out for their interest groups within the domain of global capitalism. Not that their issues aren't important, but their issues ought to be tied to something larger, in my view. And that's something that's always marked sort of leftist perspectives. It wasn't just my particular group because I identify as a 6-year-old child who has a fetish for 5-year-old girls. And well, no, because the logic,
No, I know. It's just
that you have to recognize
you're
me.
a dead man. You tweet something like that, you're just a dead man walking. But keep going. I'm sorry.
Well, it gets to the point of the ridiculous sometimes.
He stays off Twitter for this reason, right?
No, I just don't care. kind of, but I do care about a universal project. And that's what I hope, and that's what I hope. If Peterson does come down, to Athens, or Zizek and both of them come out to to Boise or wherever, then I would definitely hope that they would pick up that whole issue on how is left defining itself, or how is the left being defined by those who aren't, and that includes people who might want to posture as being from the left.
This is why it would be fantastic to get Angela Nagel also here, because well, I guess, okay, why? Okay, I presume something. I didn't share what that was. So when we're talking about like envisioning what we are, recreating what we are, getting our room in order, however as you said we should, just learning how to respond to Peterson as a sociological function in this cultural moment, I think alone gets us pretty far in that project, right? Because it corrects for some of it would have to correct, the response would have to correct for some of these worst tendencies.
Right, right.
Various groups you were talking about. For instance, just kind of like this this post-colonial dismissal or disavowal of a universal project, which there's all sorts of ways to be post-colonial and still be for some kind of a universal project, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But I mean, really though, we are at this point though where it's just like, oh, seen as problematic, therefore move on, move away from that. And it's like, no, that's actually where we probably need to stay and talk longer.
Yeah, or one of the volumes, or whatever, could open up the question, because it's something that that needs to be discussed. And I know that the Zero books collection, a lot of very strong exemplars of things that ought to qualify as left. So I would figure that Doug, you would have an interest in that kind of conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right about that?
Yeah, you're right about that.
Okay, cool. I think possibly getting Antonio Garcia. He's actually the director. I'm just the director of research and pedagogy, one of the divisions of the institute. He'd have a lot of important things to say. I know his name's not out there very much, but the dude's whip smart. I know Zizek can't be there. He's a pretty good sort of designated hitter, as it were.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Otherwise, with regard to to Peterson, I think how we respond to him, a lot of the things that I think he says, have some merit, and if only because we have to wrestle with them, right? Mm-hmm. I think they're legitimate, kinds of issues. And I really don't subscribe to the automatic, Peterson hate. And I don't know. I don't think that certainly it's not my mission in life to reform Peterson,
no.
or anything. But I think I mean, he comes across to me as being sincere, as somewhat misguided in certain kinds of ways, and sort of taken to task, Dave, you'll appreciate this term in a civil manner. Dave and Kelsey both. I don't know. I mean,
should we invite him to join us at this thing? You think, or has that already happened? Or
I mean, I wouldn't hesitate from asking him.
Antonio?
Oh, Antonio or Peterson.
Peterson.
I mean, Antonio's. Antonio would definitely come if we find a way of bringing him here.
Yeah, we should. So, I think that's good, but I'm thinking about Peterson. We should invite Peterson, and even if he turns us down, that's fine. We'll have invited him, right?
Right. Yeah. So the reason that
Dave Rubin, Ben Shapiro, bring them all. We'll take them all.
Yeah.
Don't bring
yeah. Just to piss off people at Boise State.
Well, no, we'll take them all. I mean, they should be on our side, in our corner of the ring. You know, the big fight, the big match.
Yeah.
But we don't fight anymore, I guess, for anything. Anyway.
Yeah, Dave and Kelsey, that'd be an ultimate challenge for the Civil Research Network to take that one on.
Well,
how do you prep campus for Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson?
I'm not interested. That's
you're right. We won't do that. Sorry, I take that back. Ben Shapiro.
We'll call Milo too.
No. Okay, all right.
Nah, that dude's like just a total fucking, you know, he's in there for infotainment. He's got nothing intelligent to say. Never mind.
Yeah, no, there's like this spectrum, and like we just keep going down lower. Next year, I say Richard Spencer. So wait, coming. David Duke's not on this. I just don't understand.
Yeah.
You know, the crazy shit is that nobody would bat an eye if we had Hillary fucking Clinton here.
That's true.
We'd probably get kudos, right? I mean, criminal pedophile bitch. But anyway.
All right.
So those are the kinds of comments that need a lot of unpacking before we can make sense of them. But I think that what we should instead do is really quick, unless someone has something else they want to throw in here. I'm just gonna run down the list here. So what we have, and really, what time is it? So we're keeping good time. Yeah, let's take another 15 here. The reason that Peterson has not been invited to this is because Gabbard and Antonio have both been trying to figure out like if the debate could happen in Athens or if it's going to happen in New York. Like that got thrown around. While we get ourselves sorted out, like with setting a concrete date, you know, reserving rooms, you know, some of the very basic stuff. Once we actually have this locked in and we can give a big, yes, this is happening, and we can actually show like some of what that looks like, you're like, okay, sure, this, essays might get published in a book, you know, responding to Peterson. This might go up on, this will go up on X, Y, and Z podcasts. Once we kind of have that all kind of pulled together and we have like the specific, like we've said what our audience is, we've said what our like various like main threads are, and we can say what the main panels are. At that point, we can send this out to a lot more people. I've already reached out to the Baffler and Catalyst and Current Affairs and Jacobin, and the Baffler is interested in having someone represent. And I'm still waiting to hear back from a few other people. Brianna, who I'm forgetting her last name. I can only ever remember her middle name. So Brianna Joy, somebody, editor at Current Affairs, featured in the Kill All Normies documentary. She's interested. There's a bunch of other people who are kind of like, they just want to know more. And I've told a lot of people, like, after this conversation, we'll tell them what, you know, we'll have some more concrete details for them. So for right now, I'll say what the date is in a second. I think it's just like mid. Do you know off the top of your head, Douglas?
Yeah, October 15th is the date that Peter Rollins could make it.
Yeah, so it was the 15th and 16th?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would work well for me too, I think. And I think that if we could land on that date, that would be really good.
Cool. And what I've written was like, it might be good to have a panel just for like the left on the topic of free speech, kind of like the one that Kitness was on, that was hosted by Spike TV. I know that Douglas has heard that because he shared the one of the sound clips on one of his videos, and I know Dr. Gabbard's heard that one because he shared it with me. But to kind of have that sort of conversation, you know, with the spectrum represented, perhaps a talk on the anti-SJW industry itself as a phenomenon. I'm going to give a talk on cheap criticism, basically. I don't really see myself as like heavyweight enough to really do anything except to call out cheap shit. So that's all I'll do is just say, that's cheap, that's cheap, that's cheap. Let's not do these things, guys. Let's, like, you know, put the bar higher.
Well, I think provided that you also allow for time to consider the cheap stuff that comes from the SJW crowds, right?
Well, that's what he's talking about. He's aiming it at not the SJW crowds, but at the left, at people like the Baffler and.
Oh, I thought you meant I thought you were talking about the anti-SJW group.
No, because I'm envisioning the audience is that whole documentary, the Kill All Normies documentary, it's talking about how there's this disenfranchised demographic that people like Peterson and, on the worst side, Spencer, are appealing to. And honestly, it's like 20-something white males who are just disenfranchised, right? And but I mean, remember in that documentary they talk about the teenager, the socially isolated teenager goes online and they have two internets. One, they're going to be constantly called out and degraded and put down. The other one, they're with a bunch of people who are down to hear anything. You're allowed to have any fantasy you want. You're allowed to play as anything you want to. You're allowed to be blasphemous and dismissive of anything, basically. And which one are you going to go for as that teenager? And I'm really personally interested in I want that teenager to know there's another world, and that there's something a lot more. That while Peterson might be right about a handful of things, his solution is this a traditionalism. I don't, that's not a solution. So there's a future still, and being able to have that conversation. So, and I mean, Dr. Gabbard, I think that, you could easily do a talk, or we could have a panel, either one, on universalism and the transnational culture project, for Zizek, or inspired by Zizek. And then maybe a panel just on JP's fan base and why they need Marxism.
Or at least to be set straight about what it is.
Yeah. Or maybe one that just calls Jordan Peterson and postmodern, well, that'd be a talk more but it'd be really cool if someone did a talk on why Jordan Peterson is a postmodernist. He's just not a neo-Marxist.
Right.
Which is his fault.
Well, no, I read a very interesting piece from a Canadian who kind of presented that argument that you just ran, that, Peterson ultimately is a defender of the status quo.
I just read that article yesterday. That was
really?
Yeah. Is it the one that says that that he's sort of an archetype of Canadian traditionalism, because there's just everybody in Canada has 3 of those uncles basically who are well, you're gonna have to clean your room and get a real job and work for 50 years before you can have an opinion on anything. Yeah, kind of. You don't have a right to criticize anybody else until you get your own house in order and things like this. That would have shut my ass down a long time ago, by the way. I would never publish a thing. Yeah, comb your hair.
I don't know. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
I wanted to break in with something I'd be interested in hearing a panel or a paper on. Well, first of all, I was thinking we should definitely invite Dr. McCluskey because he really stays up to date on current affairs and whatnot. And he could probably give a really interesting contribution to the free speech or whatever topic. And then also, I just wanted to say a couple things I'd like to hear is something more, a panel or a paper, and I'm willing to, I mean, I know I'm not like a podcaster or something, but I'm willing to
That's a low bar.
I'd be willing to present something on rhetoric itself and like rhetorical strategies and like, you know, manipulation and abuse of rhetoric, ways that people make rhetoric into a power game, or like how you can kind of save it from itself in that aspect, and use Peterson and the so-called SJW left on, as the examples. I'd be really interested in hearing something about that. And in addition, I think that the general focus of the conference, beyond just Peterson should really be breaking out of some categories that it feels like everyone thinks in when they think in terms of like the left and the anti-left or whatever. And those are, there's progressive, and then there's conservative, and then there's regressive. And it seems like the conservatives are either afraid of progressives being too progressive or being regressive, and then the progressives are afraid of conservatives being regressive. And it's just like it's a big mess. And so it's like, what kind of categories of thought, how can we organize in such a way that doesn't make us seem like, progress without preserving or conserving what is good or what has been valuable in civilization up to this point, or preserving that without regressive traditionalism. I think that would be a good theme, breaking some of those dichotomies that we seem to fall into rhetorically.
Mm-hmm. You're hired. You see this, what you just described as a portion of the re-civilization project that you started on campus?
Yeah, I think that this goes right along. Dave could also speak to this because he really kickstarted the new civilization. But it seems to me that if you're going to put the left in order, yeah, we need to redefine the left as no longer, something that's against the right, but something that is more universal and in the form of a universal liberation project, And I think as much as some people like to call them rad libs, and I like that better than SJW because it's not as much of an insult, although maybe it is to some people. But I think on the side of a lot of rad libs, that the theory has been a little bit lost, and it just becomes this. It can become this snarky rhetorical stuff, like the gotcha moments. But if you really read the origins of a lot of the ideas that are being used, they're not that, it's very much about universal liberation. Even just reading Paulo Freire, right, versus a lot of people who use his some of his ideas.
Yeah.
I think Sammy would be able to speak to that really well, and that that could be one talk or two. You could do one on each day. You could be on a panel, but that the rhetoric thing is excellent. But then so is just your own process coming out of conservative Catholicism into campus progressivism alongside theory, and then realizing that the slogans that seem so empty and full of contradictions, once you actually open them up and dig down inside the theory that they come from in the first place, they're not empty slogans anymore. And so that right there would be a talk that would be so useful and enlightening for a lot of the, I think that our main audience is going to be people who are trying to understand how to talk to Peterson fans, or at least people who are kind of Peterson interested. And then, actual Peterson fans or people who've been interested in him. So, and that kind of a talk right there is you kind of open up okay, well, here are these dichotomies between these different things. Okay. And then those are defunct. And then, there's actually this substance behind these slogans.
Right. And yeah. I think that what you guys are trying to do with this conference in general is open up the slogans that JP is using and dig into them and see what's so appealing, right? What's so appealing about archetypes?
Hold on. I'm gonna mute David for a half set. Okay, here we go.
What's so appealing about archetypes, or especially the father archetype, or about some of the dichotomies he tries to reinforce, and that there's stuff to back them up. It's just parsing out where people not just take things too far, but take them in the wrong direction. It's if you're flying an airplane and you shift it 1 degree at some point, you're going to end up in another part of the world, so it's kind of a lot of work. And I appreciate that you're asking a lot of I guess well-known figures or podcasters or writers from the new left, so to speak, on here, because I think it's really important. So
Yeah, and the only thing I would add is that as we unpack the slogans, one of the things we'll discover on the left is that there are still debates, live debates about what the left's project should be and how to proceed that still need to be had and that we shouldn't expect to be easily resolved. I mean, even amongst
right. I think that a lot of conservatives have made ground because they become the party of no, in the sense that, you know, if you can just say something's degenerate or oppose something, then you've got it good, right? There's not a lot of positive building projects, for as much as they like to critique the left for being negative, you know.
Right.
It's a lot easier to get a coalition going about no.
Well, this goes to our free speech panel too. I mean, all these topics sort of bleed together, and distinguishing them into separate panels is important. But the necessity for free speech on the left between leftists is a big deal, I think, because we are not going to be able to develop our own project if we're constantly casting each other out of the tribe for having the wrong ideas, especially when there aren't any right ones. I mean, right now, for instance, I think the issues around transgender people and the way to understand transgenderism, I'll just say just saying transgenderism, by the way, puts me on the outside. Right. So,
well, I mean, that is there are reasons for that, but also, yeah, I'll let you go.
I know, but I'm just saying, like, there is no settled opinion about that issue. There's no, if you take a clear stance on that issue as to what it means to be trans, say, you will alienate a number of people and find yourself having calls for your dismissal from the group, regardless of what you say, if you have a consistent line on it. And there's a lot of issues like that on the left, because what it shows is a kind of an incoherence on the left in general, not just amongst trans activists at all, but that's just one where it's very clear that there is no right issue. I mean, I was talking to a guy who was trans. Sorry, I was talking to a woman who was trans the other day, and she was telling me that she was afraid of what she was going to say on my podcast because she was sure she was going to make a lot of people angry. And she was just talking about her own experience. So, so we need to be able to have conversations that are difficult, that, in an open way.
Well, one of the problems as well, because, at the beginning of this, before some of y'all got on, I'd said that I'd listened to basically like everything that was up on Peterson like a year ago. And one of the things is that he's very sympathetic to people undergoing both gender dysphoria and actual transitions, and that he's worked with a lot of, at least he says that he's worked with a lot of people going through transitions and stuff like that, and that he's not against that. And that he also said that he would use people's pronouns if they asked him, and he knew it was in good, and he got the vibe it was in good faith, and they're not just trolling him. But then, the immediate response to his popularity has been to say that he's just the guy that's against pronouns, which is just like, no, he's never said that. At least not in all my digging, So
I think he's become
more. He says that he got 30. This is like 2016. He was saying that so far I've got about 30 letters from trans people thanking me. Because they're sick and tired of like these certain communities thinking that they like embody and speak for like all trans people. So, Sammy, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I think his rhetoric's gotten more virulent or more like aggressive because of the limelight he's been in, and also just I feel like he's really been seduced by his fan base and feels a lot of responsibility for them, and it's kind of an ego trip. I don't blame him, it's kind of a human thing. But I will say that I think with a lot of these issues, especially gender issues, because they're so new, not that people haven't had these experiences, but the language of articulating them and like a lot of this theory is very, very new. I think the issue is that people who are undergoing these things, or who are friends with people who are undergoing these things, feel very, I guess I'd say, defensive or self-protective, and get very aggressive with their rhetoric as a result. Because, I mean, here's the thing. Like, it is still a fact that lots and lots of trans people get murdered just because of, of prejudice or bias, so that these people are targeted. And so if you're living in that kind of state of heightened fear or just defensiveness, it's easy to form this sort of tribe where you push back and you get just as aggressive, and it's hard to snap out of that way of thinking, especially if you still feel like you're not accepted or not safe, or So I think we have to address some of those psychological phenomenons, and I think Peterson's been very effective because he addresses psychology, like uses psychology, but I think he misuses psychology in many ways when he applies it to the political field. And I'd also like to hear a little bit about that. So,
I really hope that Peter Rollins will be able to do something that's kind of specifically engaging with Peterson's use or misuse of psychoanalysis, because Rollins has that Lacanian grounding, and
right.
But he also has Jungian sympathies, and so yeah.
Do we want to have a panel on trans issues? I mean, it's kind of like the elephant in the room when it comes to Peterson.
I think it would be more helpful to talk about free speech and the law and whatnot, especially if you're not going to actually have any. I mean, if you found a couple of people who were actually trans who were willing to talk about it, it's just it's a very hot topic in the sense that you have to handle it with a lot of grace, because there's still a lot at stake there for some people, and it's also a huge turnoff for some other people. So I don't know. It could work out, but it would have to be very well done, and I don't know if
we'd have to get the right people to do it. And
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I wrote a piece responding to the free speech versus safe spaces debate, and I use Milo getting shut down at Berkeley, and then I use Dr. Yenner at Boise State being called for dismissal because of his statements, his fear-mongering basically about the trans activists. And so but basically, okay, so I would be down to be on a panel about that because I have a thesis, right? And I have a paper that like I can submit to it or whatever. And so but it'd be great to have something on gender and trans issues if we can get, people where that's like their expertise, either academically or experiential. But I wouldn't speak to it.
Yeah, I think that would be a good topic within that issue of why would we even need spaces that are safe? It's because the rest of society is supposed not to be safe for this person or that person. It's not just safe for your feelings, right? There's some legit stuff to be parsed out there, and I think it would make a lot of sense to. Well, it'd be kind of fun to get into why, for example, Yenner was right about a lot of the goals of feminist and queer theorists,
right.
And because a lot of it is about deconstructing sort of the patriarchal structure of the family and how the state and that. And to Yenner, that's deconstructing all civility and everything's going to descend into anarchy if that happens. But having some sort of informational session or diving into a little bit of that theory about if we get rid of some of these structures of organizing our society, will we have ones to replace them? Because otherwise people are just going to be floating around alienated, I think that'd be way better than just being directly about trans issues,
Yeah, I I've said for a while that I'm supportive of the political project of transgender people when it comes to abolishing gender roles in society. I'm for that politically, but I don't feel that it can be done in an authoritarian way or through a rights-based politics. So you can't simply use the state to enforce your political agenda against the majority opinion, say, based on protecting human rights. That I think that's a failed approach, and that a positive project that would allow for a new kind of gender expression to have a real material basis and to have some grounding in society would be the better approach, and that would mean radically transforming more than just what pronoun you use, or it would mean transforming a lot of society. And until you can do that, attacks on the nuclear family are just going to end up creating a lot of alienation, and will feel as just like social disintegration rather than some sort of emancipation. But
right. I think
that's my. I'm not sure if I'm suggesting anything like a panel or anything like that. I'm just sort of expressing an opinion. So I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, I think something that has to be addressed, no matter what, if it's like a panel or anything, is just that periods of major transition are also periods of disintegration, and I feel like a lot of the things that activists position themselves against are already disintegrating from their own contradictions, in a sense. And what we really should be looking to is what we build out of that, out of the remnants of that, right? So at this point, it doesn't seem very helpful even sometimes to just be purely anti-capitalist, because Richard Spencer, has an anti-capitalist bent in some ways, at least he purports to. And so it's not so much about being anti-family or anti-gender binary or anti-capitalism, but it's like, to get the left in order, we have to look at what kind of future are we trying to push for? Like, what are we pushing ourselves into, and that's part of the whole new symbolization, new building aspect of this thing. And I think it really should be a positive conference, in the sense of, like, getting your house in order doesn't just mean kicking out, a bunch of the whiny or the bad people. It means pulling them together.
Yeah.
Right.
It doesn't mean that at all, actually. It's what I'm sorry, I have to, but I agree with you 100%. Like, amen.
Wait, I thought that it was getting the vampire castle in order. Oh, darn it. So does, okay, so I've added Sammy to the list as a speaker and a potential panelist. I've already read off the ideas that have been already talked about. So now I just any lingering ideas that people want to share out before we close this thing down. Everyone is satiated.
That's radio silence right there.
I know, it sounded nice. Just kidding.
I wanted to yell really loud for you.
Brian, what do you think?
Sounds good to me.
Sorry, I muted myself to go make another cup of coffee, and then you guys maybe called my name or something, because everything went silent because I wasn't active. But you weren't actually calling for me just now, were you?
No, sort of. I had said that, okay, we're basically done unless anyone has any final thoughts, but especially ideas as to the structure of this this event.
Well, it seemed like we had a lot of good ideas, but we need to kind of just write up a list of panels and see what really shakes out as something we can do.
Yes.
And we should put out a call for papers.
Yeah, I think the call for papers, and then as you see people, as people confirm or say no, right, then you'll be able to shape up the panels and the structure better. But it really is dependent on who decides to come to the conference and is really involved. But a call for papers would be awesome.
Yeah, and then at the Zizekine Institute conference in May, I'll make sure flyers for this event get to everybody there. And then, Douglas, were you going to Left Forum this year?
Yes, I am.
Would you be able to push this there?
Yeah.
Sweet.
I will mention it on the panels that I'm on, and I will also have like flyers out on our table.
Sweet. Yeah, I expect the fact that this is going to be broadcast from existing podcasts as well as the potential for publication will bring a lot of people it wouldn't bring otherwise. That was like a new idea within the last month, and so it's like, oh, that changes things. That means that we're not only flying people here with our own money. That means some people will actually get department money or, money from their magazine or whatever to come. So,
yeah,
that's exciting.
All right.
Cool, y'all. Thank you.
Yep. I'm going to leave the call. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for your participation, Kelsey. Thank you, Sammy.